Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Joining us now, live from Jerusalem, is Michael Friedson. Michael, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So what brings you to Jerusalem? What are you doing there?
The Media Line News Agency. We're an American news agency specializing in coverage of the Middle East, and the Middle East has plenty to cover, so we're awful busy.
Well, for those of us that maybe get a couple of blurbs in the network news at night or on Fox News Radio, what's the situation like in Israel?
Israel itself is terrific. It's a good place to be, so much so that many of the different news organizations have their people in the Middle East stationed in Israel. It's very convenient for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which, when there's downtime, their people are in a Western type of situation, and it's, I guess, less invasive to the normal ins and outs of a family. In terms of safety, that's really not an issue. You don't feel unsafe ever, really, in Israel. And the access to anywhere that we need to be Middle East-wise is absolutely fantastic. My wife, who's the president and CEO of the company, just for instance, came back from the conference in Bahrain, just a hop, skip, and a jump from here, where we'd have to go halfway around the world if we were still stationed in the United States. So it's got its big advantages. Indeed. And why is it your passion to cover the news from Israel? Obviously, the Middle East, the flashpoint from just about everything since post-Vietnam, it seems. Well, you just said it. The intimacy. If you're smitten with the news bug, we're not. We're journalists, and we try to uphold the tenets of classical journalism. We're not advocates. We don't march the advocacy route, but there's room for everybody in what we do. And our gurus are classical journalists, and the list goes on. But once you're smitten with the journalism bug, the next step is to find access and find a place where you get to people. And when I compare being here to the United States, it's absolutely unbelievable who we get to, how quickly we get to them, how we maintain relationships with them, people that we might have a cursory hello, goodbye to in the States, or give me a quick soundbite. Over here becomes dinner and an evening together, and it's just a whole different world. If you have that proclivity, this is the place to be. Well, we also hear, though, in Israel, they got a lot of bombs going off and missiles coming at you. Oh, whoever told you that? You read the papers? Actually, it is, we speak to a lot of groups, and we host a lot of groups, and we take a lot of groups into the Palestinian areas. So we know the territory very well. And it amazes us when a group comes and we introduce ourselves and we're giving them the lay of the land. I always ask people to put up their hands if they've, before they got on the airplane, heard from at least one loved one who has urged them not to make the trip. And almost invariably, all the hands go up. But once they get here, they don't feel in any way threatened. There's a sense of, I should say the other way, there's no sense of fear, there's no sense of anxiety. It's you really can't explain it. You have to experience it. And by the way, your website, themedialine.org, themedialine.org, trusted Middle East news, balanced, not biased. So what's the relationship between the Palestinians and the Israelis from your perspective? Again, we might get Lester Holt giving us 15 seconds on it. Your objective analysis of tension or the building on the West Bank, what's going on? Oh, there's good reason for it to be a conflict that has been so difficult to address. Things like that don't happen in a vacuum. There's a lot of things that are complete showstoppers when it comes to the negotiations. But when you walk the walk here and you walk through the different areas, walk through the Israeli territories and you walk through the Palestinian territories, one of the things that strikes you is how much there is a lot of commonality. There are people who try to buck the trend of the social type politics where you're kind of forced to, if you're a Palestinian, to eschew anything that's Israeli. Of course, everybody knows now about the BDS movement, so it's become more formalized on the Palestinian side. Nevertheless, we're encountering a lot of young people who are rejecting their elders' call to have absolutely nothing to do with Israel. We're finding businessmen who are keeping a low profile, but still doing business, Israelis with Palestinians and Palestinians with Israelis. Now, I'm not trying to say that they're already building the campfire, and any day now we'll be singing Kumbaya. That's not really in the picture yet. But it's also not in the picture that it's as dismal as we see. You know, the newspapers have just so much space they're going to give to these things, and the blood and guts always gets the precedence. So it's you got to tune into something like the Media Line that gives you some of everything.
Well, and again, you can get that information whether you're in Idaho or throughout the world. That's quite a responsibility. Let's talk a little bit about Benjamin Netanyahu. How is he viewed by the Israeli people?
He's a fascinating character. Anybody that wants to do a study in political science on someone showing longevity, but not the public overt love, it's Netanyahu. I think back a lot to Nixon in the re-election in 1972 when he won in a huge landslide, but we couldn't find anybody who said they voted for him. Netanyahu is an interesting character because he doesn't evoke tremendous love on the part of the vast majority of the Israelis, but it seems that when Israelis are alone in the voting booth and they're confronted with, okay, now it's just me, nobody's asking me who I'm going to vote for, I don't have to lie anymore, but who do I want to have the finger on the trigger? For whatever reason, it usually comes up Netanyahu, or certainly it has for the last 10 years. And that's quite an achievement. He's now the longest-running prime minister, beating out David Ben-Gurion last month. So it's significant. I think that the pollsters get it wrong when they try to go with who you're going to vote for. And like I just said, everyone lies and you don't get an accurate reading. But when you ask who is they always ask this as a second question. They say, who is the one most appropriate to be the prime minister, which is usually code language for who do you want to have a finger on the button. They go back to Netanyahu. They don't have to like him. But when it comes to health and wealth, which is what I believe people go in the voting booth looking to punch the button for, health and wealth generally rings up Netanyahu. Now, this election is a little different because of his legal problems and because after 10 years there's a feeling that maybe we should look at American-type term limits here in Israel. A lot of Israelis are talking about that. But nevertheless, I certainly wouldn't count him out by any means.
What does that mean to U.S. policy to have Benjamin Netanyahu with the guy on the trigger?
Well, he's very close to conservative American politicians. And as long as there's still a conservative running the country in the United States, the warm fuzziness that's felt between the two countries can't hurt too much. Now, Israel's got its own problems because of that. Israel, it's always been extremely atop of its agenda in the United States to be completely bipartisan. But during the last administration, particularly because of the vicious debate over the nuclear agreement with Iran, that bipartisanism started to crack, and then this administration has cracked a lot more. So that's really Israel's biggest nightmare coming to fruition. And the big indicator of where that's headed is going to be this election. It's going to be September 17th.
Well, a lot of people will be interested in that. Does Netanyahu have anybody that is a rival? How is their, I suppose, form of elections, form of government different than ours?
Well, in 1948, Israel had an opportunity to pick the best of all situations and come up with a really great one. They chose instead to pick the worst of everybody else's and come up with the worst one. And it's a weird system, especially for expat Americans living here. There's like 300,000 American votes here. People who are American, who still can vote absentee ballot in America, and they do vote. So it's another battleground state. And when you look at what Israel brings to the table politically, you have American Republicans and Democrats fighting the fight just as they would back home. And we're going to see the same thing coming up again. The thing is, with communication so instantaneous and both countries so intertwined and so involved in each other's business, you really, if you're in the top of the political echelon, you have to worry about fighting in both countries. The Israelis have a continual problem that, again, they don't want to lose the friendship of the United States. That's the thing, utmost above everything. The Israeli people will not forgive a leader who squanders that relationship with the American people. So it's fun to watch. Look at it. Israelis like politics for its entertainment value, too. And a lot of Americans do as well. So it's a fun place to watch.
Michael Friedson joining us from Media Line, MediaLine.org, from Jerusalem, right here on KIDO Talk Radio with Kevin Miller in the morning. How do the folks there view President Trump?
Well, as I said, with 300,000 American voters and a lot of them Democrats and a lot of them Republicans, a lot of it is along party line. But the book on President Trump so far is that he's a tremendous supporter of the state of Israel, and Israelis appreciate that. Probably, if you picked apart the support, he probably gets more cross-the-aisle support because of the largesse that he's shown to the Israeli people so far. But, it's not over yet. There's a long way to go. I like to caution people that there's still a price to pay. These things don't happen in a vacuum. And political costs can be a little different than financial costs, but they can also be the same. There's a lot of things that we don't know yet that still have to play out. And a lot of it will be dependent upon the other half, the other shoe dropping, when Jared Kushner decides, with the input from his father-in-law, that it's time to drop the political as well as the economic side of the plan. Will the what we call the Jared junket get any farther than the merry-go-round did?
Well, Michael, please stand by. We're going to have more coming up as we take a look at the Iranians and just the dangerous yet apparently welcoming neighborhood that Michael lives in. Kevin Miller here. Want to remind you, KIDO Talk Radio is available at the App Store and Google Play. All you have to do, go there. You get it for free. Just type in KIDO Talk Radio. And you could take us anywhere. We really hope to earn that valuable real estate on your phone. Plus, we've got the free newsletter when you go to the website. And don't forget, Girls with Guns. We are still accepting applications brought to you by Independence Indoor Shooting. Get those in now. Details on our website. By the way, do want to remind you, you're listening to Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. Rolling along on this beautiful morning. Thank you for joining us. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Our guest, Michael Friedson, joining us from Jerusalem. That's right, Jerusalem, from the Media Line. Check him out today. Go to themedialine.org. As we said, you do long-form, objective journalism, which many in this country, we're going to try and keep you out of trouble, many in this country feel that advocacy or opinionated journalism has replaced that here.
Well, in a way it has. That doesn't mean it should, but it certainly has in many instances. We fight the old fight. We do things that are becoming somewhat obsolete, but we do it anyhow. Like, for instance, when we write a story, as the executive editor of the Media Line, it's my job to make sure that nothing leaves this newsroom unless it has every narrative appropriate to the story told completely and honestly. That's as close as a human being can get to being objective. And we're very happy if we can get to that plateau. If someone doesn't want to read the whole thing, that's okay. We try to do the journalistic thing by loading the story on the top and giving you what there is. We have a daily blast, we call it, the daily news blast. It's only about 650 words. We pick like 4 stories from the region, not just Israel, not just Palestine, but the region. And it's for people with a life, that people don't want to know what's going on in the Middle East, but they don't want to spend their day fretting over it or reading through pedantic material. And we try to offer like something for everybody. We also train journalists. We believe so much in what we're doing that we created a press and policy student program where we're signed now with 15 universities in America that give credit to academic credit to their students to participate with us They can either learn it back on their campus or come here to Israel and work in the most contentious region in the world in a working room, a newsroom with veteran mentors, and really get something big out of it. We've got some that have gone on to great things. So it's a challenge.
Boy, definitely a life-changing experience.
Oh, absolutely. We've got a senior CBS person, someone in Reuters, USA Today. We covered the gamut. It's really exciting.
Let's get back to some of the excitement. We've taken a look at Israel from a few perspectives. What about the Palestinian perspective? Will there ever be legitimate, a kumbaya moment where everybody gets along?
I don't know how far that's going to go. I don't know if I'm going to live long enough. But as I told you, we have witnessed some pretty good moments. I guess I can stress that it's not all bad, but how far good it's going to go is a subject of many different inputs. One input, of course, is the United States and Israel and where the formal peace process is going to go. The other is a changing Palestinian society. Like any other society, the older people are dying off and young leadership is coming in. I think this is one of the key problems on both sides. My personal belief, like for instance, with Netanyahu lasting 10 years in office, my personal belief is that in the Middle East, leaders don't nurture and embrace their would-be replacements. They fear them. They're the ones who are going to knock them off, figuratively, I hope. And that keeps keeps kind of lopsided in terms of who's going to be who and who's going to rule. And I think that's a large part of why Netanyahu has lasted in office so long. They're trying to bring some young people up now, and it'll be interesting to see. I kid with I do a radio program in New Hampshire 3 times a week, and I kid the residents in New Hampshire who think that the road to the presidency leads through their state. I say, come to Israel. You're not going to find a candidate who doesn't come to Israel first.
Exactly. And before that, let's get to traffic and weather together. KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Dave. Thank you, Larry. We continue on. Michael Friedson joining us from themediaonline.org. Michael, let's talk a little bit about other actors in that region. How close do you get? I mean, do you go to Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, all these other countries, or do you primarily stay in Israel?
We have writers that go everywhere, and when the reason is there, we go. As I said, my wife, who's also my boss, just came back from Bahrain. She was there when the economic conference was being held, and she was in Yemen a month before the revolution, and that doesn't imply anything. And we do what we got to do. It's an amazing region. It's really it grasps at you, and it's beautiful, and there's a lot here, and civilization came here and knew what it was doing.
Yeah, I still don't buy that it's safe.
Well, if you read the New York Times and the morning after a shooting in one of the cities of the States, you ask the same thing. Before we were stationed here, we did a lot of coverage, and we were based in South Florida. And I remember one Sunday we were on our way to the airport, and we were informing our listenership of our plans to go, and somebody called in and said, aren't you scared to go there? Isn't it unsafe? I said, yeah, it's really unsafe to go there, but once you leave the Miami airport, it's safe.
Well, let's take a look at some of the actors in the region. What about Iraq? Your thoughts on Iraq? You have reporters there. We always hear the bad news, but Iraq, how stable is it from the Israeli perspective?
Well, from the Israeli perspective, it's great because Israel's over here and it's over there. Iraq is one of the real tough spots in the region. It portends a lot of bad things. When you're allegedly allied with some of their soldiers, and their soldiers take out weapons and start shooting our soldiers, that's about as heinous as it can get. Again, I don't mean to imply that everything is la-di-da and everything is safe. It's a tough region, and we as an agency have suffered greatly from it. I don't know if you recall the name Stephen Sotloff, but Stephen was one of the 2 Americans beheaded by ISIS, and he was our reporter. And the year that he was in captivity, the 8 months we didn't have proof of life, the subsequent outcome, his mentorship here, it's very, very difficult. And when I talk about the feeling of ease and the fact that you don't feel threatened, that's very true. And why there is this disconnect, I really can't answer, but it's there, and it's there very strongly. I guess it has a lot to do with the people. But I certainly don't mean to imply that there is no element of danger, but I honestly believe to a tourist it's not any greater than going to any of the major American cities.
Michael, please stand by. Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. We'll hear more from Michael in a minute. Do want to remind you, Girls with Guns 2019, we're wrapping up the entry. So if you have a girl with a gun and you'd like to win some great prizes from our friends at Independence Indoor Shooting, go to our website right now. That website, KIDO Talk Radio. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Maggie. Great day here in America, in Idaho. What about the rest of the world? Well, Michael joining us once again to talk a little bit about this. Michael Friedson from themedialine.org. Michael, you're in Jerusalem. We appreciate your insight. We appreciate your courage. Are journalists courageous?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe crazy, but certainly courageous.
Let's go to the Iranians. Bad actors in the region for many, many years. You're a lot closer to them than us.
Yeah, we talk to them a lot. We use sometimes encrypted equipment. We have ways of contacting them. We speak to the men and women on the street in Tehran quite a bit. We try to keep our finger in the pie and know what's happening. And amazing the kind of things you find out. I'll give you an example. We were one of 3 news organizations in contact with a group at one particular point. And in the course of the conversation, the Iranians were critical of the American lack of support. This was during the previous administration. And they said that there was a couple of times that with the help from the Americans, they could have pushed it over the top and possibly had a coup. And in the course of explaining all this, they criticized heavily the Voice of America. Now, we Americans have always been told how important Voice of America is and believe that it's doing this great job, and I do believe it is. But this one Iranian had a thing out for it, and we asked them, well, if you don't get your news from Voice of America, how do you stay in touch? And his answer, without thinking, was the Israeli Farsi channel.
Huh.
Not something you'd expect.
No, not at all. Now, have you or your reporters gone inside Iran?
Oh, we have people that come in and out, yes. There's still a lot of commerce in Iran, and a lot of Americans still go in and out of Iran. It may not be the brightest thing to do. I suggested to one of our reporters when I quashed the trip he had in mind that every once in a while the government there goes picking. They pick up Americans who are there legally and legitimately for business reasons, but because they carry American passports, they'll pick them up for really for future exchanges or for political intrigue, and that makes it pretty dangerous to do that. But it's very important to stay in touch with Iran. Iran is the bad actor, as you put it, and it's the source of really everything else that's the changing dynamic of the Middle East in some form has its tentacles in the Iranian situation.
Well, back to Iran, how difficult is it to go in? I thought it's illegal to go in there if you're an American.
It's, I think back to the years that we were smoking Cuban cigars, and we weren't supposed to be doing that. And everybody that had a cigar had a story. And over in this part of the world, we're hearing Iranian stories. I'm certainly not advocating going into Iran if you're an American citizen, for many reasons, legalities included, but I'm also, as a reporter, saying it happens a lot.
It's a fascinating story because we've heard for years how the Iranian people, and we saw the uprising when Crazy Mahmoud was in charge, how close they came to overturning the mullahs, and yet the Iranian people, still are under that regime.
Absolutely. Well, what they were telling us back several years ago was they needed what they wanted most from Americans was cash, money. They felt that they didn't want bullets, they didn't want guns, they didn't want any kind of armament. They felt that the insidious Revolutionary Guard could be bribed, and they could force a change of regime that way. Whether or not it was true, I don't know, and we'll never know. But that was their position, and they're the ones who were living the life, walking the walk.
Yeah. Again, and Michael, you and I go back a ways. We go back to the embassy that was overrun and the hostages, and just how in your face that was in 1979.
Absolutely, one of the most horrendous. Well, it gave birth to a lot of media, actually.
Did Nightline? Yeah, Nightline.
Yeah.
So back to the Iranians. What is their reaction to the end of the arms deal, and how do they view President Trump?
He's not their favorite guy, but they're making the most out of it. The Iranians are not stupid, and people who make that mistake of calling the enemy stupid are probably doing something stupid themselves. The Iranians have an amazing sense of I should say, understanding of American politics. I've criticized Israeli leaders before for not spending time just learning government 101 out of America, but they don't. The Iranians certainly do. And the Iranians know, well, for instance, right now, the Iranian read on the American situation is that the president is handcuffed. The president doesn't have the leeway. No Congress, including his own friends in Congress, are going to allow boots to return on the ground. They're not going to allow major expenditures. They're not going to allow a situation by controlling the funding. They will not allow a situation where things will blow up in the American face. And the Iranians are seizing that opportunity by every means possible. So they know, for instance, when they're going to send mines against the hulls of oil tankers, they say they know they're going to get away with it. It was no surprise to them that the president allegedly called off a raid against them after the two ships were bombed. Their read was correct, and they played it correct. They played their game exactly properly from their perspective. And just how far the president's going to take anything at this point has a very strong element. You know, our journalistic guru is a guy named Marvin Kalb, and certainly the older listeners will remember Marvin. He wrote a magnificent book explaining how, since the Vietnam War, the ghost of Vietnam has permeated every presidency that has come and gone since that time. And one of the key factors is the war powers. And it's amazing how quickly and how well the enemy has learned that, sometimes much more succinctly and much more convincingly than the Americans themselves.
Again, you go back to the Iranians, not to be underestimated, going back to their time when they were known as Persians.
Yeah.
Michael, let's go to the situation in the Straits of Hormuz. As kids, we heard about how dangerous it was, a bad neighborhood. You've got the Iranians. I mean, this is like the old playbook where they threaten to close down the Straits of Hormuz.
It's interesting, though, that the Straits of Hormuz are really not as important as they were back then. The American fuel going through the Gulf of Mexico pretty much quashes the oil going through the Straits of Hormuz. So much so that, I don't know if you're familiar with there's a sort of, I call it a tax. I don't know what the proper way to refer to it is, but there's a risk factor put on every barrel of oil. And when things are really hot and heavy, it can be a lot of money. Interestingly, it's only about $2 a barrel now. And that tells the oil people that if something goes really haywire in the Strait of Hormuz, it's not the worst thing in the world to happen. And it shows a significant shift in the dynamics. But in terms of bragging rights, in terms of ways to get under the enemy's skin, and ways of coming up with things that are pretty insidious, it's certainly playing its role over time.
Right. And again, it's interesting your assessment on how the Iranians pretty much predicted the president's reaction. That I think the Chinese would like to take a page out of their playbook on that one.
Oh, very much so. And the Chinese are getting under the Israeli skin. On one hand, they have a tremendous relationship, a growing economic relationship, and there's a lot of good stuff. But on the other hand, it's getting so warm and fuzzy that Washington is really bent out of shape. And if you had to pick the single issue that warm, fuzzy relationship between Jerusalem and Washington is threatened by, it's the Israeli reception to the Chinese. And the item that is utmost on the anger list is the fact that the Israelis have hired a Chinese company to be in charge of and operate ports that house American nuclear ships coming in on R&R. And I can't think of another issue that has set American military against Israeli military as vociferously as this let the Chinese into something as sensitive as a nuclear area. So it's something we got to watch.
Right. Why would the Israelis do that?
That's the number one question on the hit parade over here. People walk around in the streets muttering to themselves, why do Israelis do that? Nobody knows.
How about the Saudis?
Saudis are part of that changing dynamic. There was a time that Israelis dare not be caught in Saudi Arabia, which doesn't mean that Israelis were not going to Saudi Arabia. They always were. There was a time when I was a lot younger that we were told that most of the refrigerators in Saudi Arabia had their ID plates removed, the ones that said made in Israel, and they created made in Saudi Arabia plates, and almost every Saudi that had a refrigerator had an Israeli refrigerator. So there's always been a relationship with other Arab countries as well. Nevertheless, Israelis and Saudis couldn't be too close because of the Palestinian issue primarily, but other cultural things as well. That's kind of changing now. The predominantly Sunni populations in the Gulf region have made a calculated decision. They're saying, we hate to do this to our brothers, but quite honestly, we expect a big one. We expect some kind of confrontation, an armed confrontation between the Iranian side, or those states headed by the Iranians and those states headed by the Saudis. And if we had to pick, with all due respect to the Palestinians, it's not as important for us to support them as it is to have the Israeli military prowess on our side when this big one comes. And because of that, there's a change in dynamics where Israelis are allowed in situations they weren't allowed in before. The Israeli opposition to American arms deals to the Saudis has changed considerably. The whole picture of the region is changing, and like when you choose up sides for a sandlot game, that's how they're choosing up sides now. And things are very, very different than they were only about 10 years ago.
Yeah, who would have ever thought that? The threat must be real from the Sunnis. Now, the Saudis are the Sunnis and the Iranians are the Shia?
That's right.
All right, more coming up with Michael next. Kevin Miller in the morning. Don't forget KIDO Talk Radio. We've got the app. More information on our website. We hope to earn some much-needed real estate, some hard-earned real estate on your phone. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Hope you're having a great day. Coming up, we'll have another traffic report along with weather to get you to work safely and on time. Big guest today. Joining us now from themedialine.org is Michael Friedson. What do you make of you're a true believer, right?
I believe.
All right. Well, in journalism, though, and it's gotten such a bad rap in this country, you have described journalism, what you believe journalism should be and what you practice. But when we take a look at the death of the local papers, I was looking at this story last week where, get this, after 150 years, the Youngstown Vindicator closes its doors. That was started right after the Civil War. It's amazing. So you're a digital publication. What do you make of, the old standby in our America, newspapers and their future?
I love newspapers. I love the dirt that it leaves on your fingers. I like to hear my wife, and before her, my mother, scream to get the paper off the couch. I like to do the crossword puzzles. I like to go through the physical motion, often the most physical motion I exert during a day, to open the door, bend down, and pick up the paper and bring it in the house. You can't replace the newspaper, and yet it's being replaced, and it's I think it's a tragedy. Young people look at me and say, well, you're crazy, but it's something we can't replace, and it's something that's very valuable, and in many ways that people never think about, it might be the reason that some people actually have some kind of relationship with news. And keeping that relationship with news hot is the most important thing to where we're coming from.
Well, and that idea of the local town newspaper.
Oh, you can't replace that. No digital system has yet been created where the feeling of a town is as well expressed as it is in a newspaper.
KIDO Talk Radio, traffic and weather together. Good morning, Dave. Thank you, Larry. So, Michael, let's take a look at the upcoming end of the year, if you will. What do you expect in your region to happen? Could we see an accidental war breakout?
I don't really buy the accidental war scenario. It certainly exists, and it's certainly real, and I'm not belittling it. But things are so sophisticated, and there's enough false safes that things we're told are accidents. I don't really believe they're really too accidental anymore. I don't think the war scenario is really rife yet. I believe that there's enough fail-safe that things can be brought back and brought down. One of the little often missed signs that we just saw was the rhetoric that followed the situation with the bombing of the 2 oil tankers. And that was followed by a drone being shot down. And it was interesting that from the source that we were so used to hearing, we're going to cream your country, we're going to blow it off the map, we're going to do this and do that. What we heard was there's going to be a situation where we're going to knock every drone you have out of the air. Well, gee, now we've gone down to air hockey. And it's kind of strange to say it, but that was a fairly optimistic rendering of future warfare. It's becoming more mechanized. Israel's a good example, by the way. Israel is known for its armored corps. Its tanks are famous worldwide. And they've just done away with all the brilliant Merkava tanks that they're known for, and they put out a tender. A tender means they say, we need this, and companies come to pitch it and get their model chosen. And it was boiled down to 3 model tanks. And the 3 model tanks are going to be just like platforms for video games. And times they are a-changing. And it's a little too soon to know exactly where it's going to end up, where it's all going to stop. But the warfare versions are going to be going first. And what happens post-warfare versions of changing the armies around is interesting to see.
Going back to, the idea of the Sunni versus the Shia, and you could say that predates civilization.
Yeah, it's been around as long as we have, and there's no sign of it going away.
Yeah. Is it tough for us in the West to understand that?
It apparently is. It shouldn't be. It couldn't be much more clear, but it certainly must be difficult.
Yeah, indeed. Anything else you'd like to say to the folks here in Idaho?
No, just that it's a pleasure to be with you guys in Idaho. We enjoy your potatoes immensely. I miss American potatoes very much. I don't want to be too difficult to the local farmers, but there's nothing like the Americans, and all things American are missed when you're an expat. So I'd love to be in Idaho, and I'm glad you invited me, and I'd love to do it again. And I hope in the interim people will go to themedialine.org, sign up for our daily. It's free, and you get just a taste. Not you don't get inundated with a whole day's worth of reading, but just a quick snippet of what's going on in the Middle East, and follow our press and policy program and see how American students can be mentored in a real working newsroom in a real tough neighborhood, and just be part of the family.
Well, I'm glad to hear that people are still doing real journalism.
Well, I'd like to invite you to come and join us.
Maybe I will.
You're more than welcome to use our radio studio to do the show and not miss a beat, and bring yourself up to snuff on what's happening in the Middle East.
All right. I think I'll stay away from Tehran, though.
Okay, it's a deal.
Thank you, Michael.
Pleasure.
Thank you. All right, Michael Friedson joining us. Outstanding when you're thinking of just what this young man is going through. He and his wife, themedialine.org, real journalism, working on the facts, getting things straight, not making things up. And remember, you have bombings going on. You have the Scud missiles coming in. You have the Iron Dome. And then we didn't even really talk about the history of Jerusalem, of Bethlehem, of going to these historic sites, just like we go to downtown Boise or to Eagle or Caldwell. Boy, amazing. And that the Iranians have pretty much game planned President Trump. We hope you enjoyed that. We appreciate, again, Michael Friedson for joining us. Check out his site, themedialine.org, and we'll do our very best to continue to give you objective information. Yeah, we have opinions, and the great thing about Michael and his wife and the folks there is they keep their opinions out, and that's a good thing. Now, if only we could import that type of service, that type of commitment back to America, back to Idaho. Let's make that happen. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio.